Well, welcome to Training Without Travel, Idea Software Training via Practical Application, presented jointly by AuditNet and Richard Cascarino and Associates. This webinar is part of the Training Without Travel series covering Idea Software, and today's webinar covers Advanced Report Importing in Idea. I'm Jim Kaplan, founder of AuditNet, and I will be moderating the webinar. Joining us is Richard Cascarino, principal of Cascarino Associates, and he will be discussing, actually building on the previous course. This advanced module is going to be looking at importing from more complex print files. So let me go ahead and have Richard introduce himself and give you a brief overview of his background, and then I'll cover some of the housekeeping items for the webinar. Richard?
Okay, thanks, Jim. As Jim said, my name is Richard Cascarino, and I'm the principal of Richard Cascarino and Associates, based out of Colorado in the States. I'm currently off base in South Africa. My background, I started a depressing number of years ago in IT, and I have some 30 years experience in IT audit training and consultancy. I'm a past president of the Institute of Internal Auditors in South Africa. I set up the South African region for the IIA Inc. I'm a member of ASACA, a member of the Association of Certified Fraud Examiners, and I'm on their Board of Regents for Higher Education. I'm the author of the Auditor's Guide to IT Auditing, and you'll see on that slide Corporate Fraud and Internal Control, a Framework for Prevention, which should be out in about 3 months' time. So my background, that's where I'm coming from on this. Let me put you back to Jim for the housekeeping.
Very good, Richard. Thank you. We do have a few housekeeping items that we would like to go over. We will be recording this webinar, and it will be made available to all participants within 48 hours after the conclusion via an email notification. We kindly request that everyone fill out the brief online evaluation questions that you'll see at the conclusion of the webinar. Your feedback is very valuable, so please take a minute or two to complete the survey. In addition, because the webinar qualifies for CPE credits, we will be putting up polling questions in compliance with NASBA rules. Those answering the questions will receive their CPE certificate by email within 7 to 10 business days. You have an opportunity both during and at the end of the webinar to ask questions. Submit your questions during the presentation via the chat window at the lower right-hand box on your screen. Simply type your question and press return to send it. Any question we're unable to answer by the end of the webinar will be answered via email directly within 48 hours. As moderator, I will be launching the polls and showing the results and monitoring any questions. In addition, we have some technical items also. If you're having trouble with the webinar software, check to see if Java is enabled and whether you have any pop-up blockers disabled. If you're still not able to get the webinar to function, just log out and log back in. If you can connect to the webinar in the audio portion but get kicked off at any time, just reconnect using the same steps you used at first. At this point, I'd like to turn the floor over to Richard to introduce the agenda and get started on today's webinar. Richard?
Thanks, Jim. Okay, let's take a look at what we're going to start with today. We're continuing from the previous webinar that we did, which was on manipulating reports, whether they be PDFs or whether they be printed reports, which have then been supplied to us in electronic form, either by scanning them in or by producing them as a print report file. Now we're going to take a look at some of the more complicated things that you get when you get these reports. And we'll look at things like using values from previous records. We'll have a look at headers, footers, and page breaks, and the use of multi-line entries with multi-line field options. We'll have a look at append layers and pre-append and post-append layers, and we'll take a look at floating traps. Floating traps are used where you do not have information in columnar form. So, for example, instead of having records coming in a fixed format, which typically you get on a printout, so you may have a printout showing all of the names vertically, then all of the addresses vertically, then all of the financial figures vertically. If you have a printout that comes in, for example, from a log file, every single line looks different. There are no vertical lines on the thing at all, which means that instead of saying this is a field from position 5 to position 15, we need to define our fields across the line instead of vertically. And that's how we do it with floating traps. So we'll create some floating traps, and then we'll take a look at where you have a problem with a line on a printout that falls within the trap, but you really don't want it. How do you get rid of it? How do you exclude it from your database? And if it's recurring, how can you filter it out of your database? So that's where we'll be heading. We'll start off where we finished off on the last one by bringing up IDEA. And what I'm going to do on this one, unlike previous ones, on previous webinars, I've brought up IDEA and then I've gone purely through IDEA. In this one, we'll be flicking backwards and forwards between the slides itself. So we're going to start up IDEA in the normal way. We'll start from Programs, IDEA, and we'll set the working folder. And the working folder we're going to use by saying File, Set Working Folder. So if I go across and bring it up, I'm now sitting in IDEA with my working folder. And the working folder I'm going to be using is going to be sitting within my samples within IDEA. Okay. Now, as with the last one, we'll start off using the same file, and we'll import it by going the same way through File, Import Assistant, and Import to IDEA. Now we know that the file that we're looking for is either a print report or an Adobe PDF, and we know that the file is sitting within my tutorial, and it's called Dave's Bookshop 5. So I'll bring that file in, and as soon as I bring that file in, because I've said that it's a print report or PDF file, it will immediately fire up my report reader. My report reader is reading the report. This is what the printout looked like. Now somehow I'm going to have to define all of that lot into the system. And you can see we have a variety of information. We've got header information for each page up here, Dave's Accounting Bookstore, monthly shipping report, etc. We've got information containing try that again. We've got a line containing information regarding the account, the contact name, the company. Then we've got some address details. Then we have our shipping information. And finally, we have a telephone number. But it gets more complicated than that, because if we look down through the report, you can see we've got multiple companies, and then in the middle of a company, we've got a page break. So somehow we're going to have to define something that runs across a page break. And this is where it's actually comparatively easy, but it looks comparatively difficult. Okay, so you'll see that account number 100 has got a single date for each of the 3 items, so we need to carry that forward from record to record to record. And then if we look at account number 101, account number 101 has got no transactions at all. And if we look at account number 102, account number 102, we don't have a company name. We've got just the person's name. So we've got no contact. The person's contact name has gone over into the company name. So we've got a typical printout that you've received, which may or may not be of use in its current form. Now, going back into my slides. We're going to be working with multiple pages, so we've brought in our file from Import Assistant, imported it into IDEA, we told print report in Adobe PDF, we selected it from the tutorial folder Dave's Bookstore 5, and you can see, as I said, it's organized with multiple sort levels with account number information being on the uppermost level. It's got transactions or detail lines for each account, although in one case there are none. And we want each transaction to be exported into Excel as one separate record. Sorry, I'm saying into Excel, into IDEA as one separate record. And the information in the detail lines are those which we define layer. Okay. Now it's an interesting situation that you can get yourself in. If you start off with the base layer being one of these transactions, then you're going to have 3 transactions plus the account number on each transaction, the date on each transaction, the name on each transaction, etc. If you start off by declaring that the account number is your base layer, then your base layer and one of these transactions will be attached to the base layer. So it's one that the auditor has to watch. You always start off with your transaction data as your base layer, and then you add on to the transaction, because I want that information in for each transaction. I do not want that company and one transaction. Okay. Information about the account number will then be captured as part of an append layer. So again, this information about the account will be appended to my base layer down here. And in the same way, as I said, 100's got a single date for the 3 items, 101's got no transactions, and the company is blank for 102. We've got multiple pages, and the page break can have the header and the footer repeated on each page. And as I have in this situation for account number 102, page breaks can occur in between a multi-line entry or within a field, and you need a way to block the section out in order to define the fields above, below, and around that page break. The way we do that is by defining a header and a footer layer. And when you define a header and a footer layer, you're telling the report reader, when you hit these layers, jump over them. Skip those lines. Do not include them in my database. Now, if you want the header in the database, then that's fine. You can define it as a separate layer. But if you want to exclude it and allow transactions to roll across multiple pages, we need to be able to skip the lines in between. Headers and footers are always associated with a page break. So what we do in Report Reader is we will tell it this break, and the bit above it is a footer and the bit below it is a header. We don't have to put traps in to identify them, because when you tell it this is a page break, we can tell it that the header layer is 5 lines from the page break. So again, if we look at that, there's my header and there's my page break. I can come down to the next page break. There's a page break, and I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 lines. That's my header. I can also tell it that when the 5 lines following it, the report will be selected, and it will skip over those when you define multiple multi-line entries or multi-line fields. Footer layer, same thing, ends at a page break, so we tell it where to begin, and in this case we've got the footer layer defined as the 3 lines before the page break, and it will then take every single page and say 3 lines before it or the footer, ignore it. Now what you cannot do is you cannot define the header and the footer until you've defined the base layer that you're starting with. Okay, the first layer defined is going to be your base layer, and you cannot define that as a header or a footer layer. And for every template, there can only be one header layer and one footer layer. Okay, so working on that basis, we can then create. When we say we want to create a layer, I'm going to pick up my layers, and my base layer we know is going to be this one down here with the accounting information. So I'll pick that up, and it gives me an option to create a standard layer or a floating layer. At this stage, we've got vertical columns, we don't need floating information, we'll take a standard layer. So we say yes. And that line gets copied up here into my field editor. And down the side you can see the field line. We don't actually have anything in there at the moment. Okay. What distinguishes that detail line from any other, we need to find some way of saying, how will I know that that's a detail line? So I'm going to start with the data. I'm going to create my standard layer because we know that this is in columns. Not everything is in the same column, but it is in columns. And we're then going to define what is different in this line from any other. Okay. And that brings us to our first polling question. Which I've just jumped straight back to the start. Apologies. And I will take you in.
It's okay. I've launched the polling question, Richard.
Thank you.
Okay. The poll is now open. Please take a moment to read the question. Headers and footers are defined using. Please select one. Numeric traps, blank traps, no traps, or non-blank traps. We'll leave that poll open for, it looks like everybody has voted now, and we've got a split decision, Richard.
Mm-hmm.
We have 50% said blank traps, 50% said no traps.
And the answer is no traps.
No traps.
Okay. You'll see when we come into them that a header and a footer you simply define as a header and a footer. There will be no traps.
Okay.
Okay.
Very good. I'll go ahead and hide the results. And
okay. Defining the data lines. Let's go in and start defining lines within our actual system. So we've got our base layer. In this case, it's the record of accounts or transactions. We need something which is unique to that field, and the thing that's unique to that field or to that line, the amount. We could try and pick up one of those slashes, but you'll see it's not in every line. But we know that the amount has always got a decimal place. So up here, I'm simply going to put in a decimal point. And when I've done that, you can see it's immediately highlighted in blue all of those items that is selected. Now, it hasn't picked up anything for account 102 because there are no detail lines. But it's picked up those ones for 103. Sorry, for 102. So we're happy with that. I'm now going to define that there has to be something behind it. So I'll double click on the numeric, and that's going to trap me that there must be not only a decimal point, but there's got to be something value after that decimal point. Okay. There are other options that we've got. We can have a text trap, which will trap for in your letter. I could pick up there and trap for an A. We've got our numerics. We've got a space trap. We'll look at that a bit later. And we can have a non-blank trap, which will trap anything except spaces. Okay, happy with these? So now we can go into our data. And the first thing we want is to pick up that date. The editor line, and pick that up. And you can see over in the field details, it's given me a name. And the name I want is date. So I'll put in date. It's a character field? No, it's not. It's a date field. So I need to change the type into date, and it will then ask me for a mask. And I know that it's month slash day slash year. So I put that in, and that's that field now defined. Okay. You can see there we're in a standard layer. It's the first layer within that standard layer, layer 1. Okay. If everyone's happy with that, we can then go on and pick up the next item, which is going to be accounting 1, 2, 3. And that's going to be my title. So I'll put in there title. It is character, and I'm happy with that. And then all I need is the amount. So I'll pick up the amount. And again, I can give it the title, the amount. It's 2 decimal places. I'm happy with that. But there's a problem. If you look at that ship date, I defined it, but it's only picking it up from the first line. So I need to go back into that one. There's my date. But down here, further down on there, under attributes, you'll see blank cells. Now that's a blank cell and that's a blank cell. It says leave blank. I don't want to leave it blank. So I'm going to say use the value from the previous record. Okay. And in that case, we are now happy. So now we have the current layer. And if I wanted to see what the database would look like with only that, I can go in and say File, Preview Database. And there's my date, there's my title, there's my amount. And that's all I've defined, so that's all I've got in my database at the moment. It's not all I want. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pick up the next line. And I want that line, but I also want these. It's still a standard layer, but this is now going to be an append layer. The thing which is unique to it is going to be something on that account number line. So we know that that colon is a unique field on that line, so we'll pick that one. And again, I can see I've highlighted it there. If I come down, it's highlighted it there, and it's highlighted it. But there's a problem. It has not highlighted all of the lines. Down here, Toronto and Canada wasn't picked. Those were picked. Those were picked. But the ones below the page break were not picked. So at some point, we're going to have to go and pick those up. We've tracked all of the appropriate lines, but we're confused by that page break in the middle. So I'm going to pick up my account number. And we know that this is now layer 2. We know that it's account number. We know it's numeric, so we're happy with that. We're going to pick up our contact name, Ted Brown, and we'll give it some more space because there may well be something coming in at the back of that. We've got Ted Brown there, but there could be something further down with a different name, Anna Lane, etc. So the length of the field is going to be different. That's going to be my contact. So I'll tell it that this is going to be my contact. And once again, I'm in the situation that if I stopped now, that would only appear on the first line. So what I need to do is I need to tell it blank lines, use the value from the previous entry. And again, on account, I need to tell it I want to use the value from the previous entry. So on this line, which is being appended to, it will put 100 Ted Brown. On the next line, it was also putting 100 Ted Brown. Over here, I've got the company. Now, I could define that as one big field by simply doing that, or I could define it as individual lines, which is probably how I'll use it. So the first one is going to be simply address 1. My next one is going to be address 2. Next one will be address 3. And we've got a problem because it's picked it up in the wrong place. That should have been all the way out to there. So it's now address 3 and we're happy. I'm going to take the country. It says USA, but it could say Malaysia or anything else, so I need more than 3 letters. And I'm going to say that's going to be the country. And when I'm happy with that, I'll say I'm going to save that there as well. Now if I look at what would be created, and I preview the database, there we have our contact. There was no contact for that, we know that. Our address, we've got a problem. It's 3, and we've got a problem with those. So again, I can go back in and edit, and this time I'm editing layer 2. And if I go in and pick up that line, sorry, my mistake, layer manager, layer 2, edit layer 2. So I now have that in. We've got the account. We've got the name. We've got address 1, address 2, address 3, and address 3 is showing as numeric. So I need to change that to character. Okay. And that's character, so we're happy with that. At this stage, what you can do is you can save the layer and you can say, do me a check. Scan it for errors. There are no validation errors in the report. Okay. So again, I can preview my database. And there's my database. And it's showing the individual lines for each of those. But that's not all I need. I also need a third line. So I'll pick up the third line. Again, I'm creating a standard layer. Again, I need something that will uniquely identify it. And this is going to be my telephone number. It's character. And again, I'm going to use a value from previous accounts. I'm going to set that. Now we have the telephone numbers. Okay. Are we happy? We shouldn't be specifically happy. We still need to go back and look at layer 2 because we still have a problem in layer 2. That is not appearing. I'll rephrase that. That one, just remove that field anchor. This here is only appearing on the first line, and so is that. So I have a problem with that line. Again, if I go across to my slides, we've defined a data line, we've defined a pending line, we've defined a trap, we highlighted our account title and amount. Now, using value from previous records, and then we use the telephone number using previous value records. So if I look at this one, my count, there it is, it's numeric, and blank cells should be using the value from the previous record. It is numeric, that's our character, and it is using the value from the previous record. That is not using the value from the previous record because each individual one is going to be different. Or is it? We need to use the values from the previous records. Because at the end of the day, each of those is different. But each one for each of these data lines is going to be the same. So I need to go down and say, use the value from the previous record. Address 2, use the value from the previous record. Address 3, use the value from the previous record. And address 4, use the value of this record. And if I take it now, and I go and look at it, and preview my database, you can see I'm getting, these are repeating now. What isn't repeating is we've got the account number, we've got the name, we've got the address, repeating in all of them. We don't have anything in there for contact, but if you remember, in that particular account number 102, we don't have a contact. There's account number 1 with Anna Lane, but no transactions. There's account number 102, but we have no contract. So that would be correct. We're happy with that. Okay, happy so far. Again, it's one of these things where if you are unsure, you can always go into the layer manager, pick up the particular layer that you're interested in, edit it, pick the field that you're interested in, say, I'm not sure if I'm supposed to use the value or not. Let me take it out and leave it blank. I think that's what I'm supposed to do. Okay, let me go and see what I've got. I'll go and preview my database. Okay, it hasn't picked up that first one. It's picked the other ones up, it hasn't picked that one up. That must mean that I need that one in there. So I will go back and put it in. Go back into my editing layer manager, layer 2, edit. There's the one there, and that should be use the value from the previous record. Okay, we have another one here that picked up. Somehow we managed to get another one in there, and you can see it says layer 2 and it doesn't have a name. That happens if you simply click. You've created something. Now that will import into my database. So what I need to do is remove that one and remove that one. When I tick it now and I go and look at my database, that column has disappeared, the extra column that had been created. The other nice thing about this is you've got here the telephone number. You don't have to just take the telephone number. I can again go back into my layer manager and edit it. And I pick up, I'm now wanting layer 3, so I will close that and go into layer 3 and say I want that bit there, just that first part. So I don't need to define the whole thing as a telephone number. I can bring all of that back and define the code separately and then define the number. So the fact that it's in one piece on here doesn't mean to say I have to take it in one piece. Okay. And of course now I've done it without a 5, so now I need to go back in and edit layer 3 and stretch it back out again. But we still have a problem because we're not picking up this Toronto and Canada. So what I need to do is go and define something that will shift everything around when I hit a header or a trailer. So I'm going to define a new line. There's 5 lines at the top. I'm going to create a standard layer. And all I'm going to do with this is say that's a header layer. And then I'm going to go down to the bottom. I'm going to take all those blanks at the bottom. Sorry, I'm going to accept that layer. I'm going to go down to the bottom at the page break. I'm going to take that lot. And I'm going to say create a standard layer. And this time, a footer layer. And now if we look, when we try to export and preview our database, we should be getting all of that information, and all of it's now being highlighted. Okay, so all we said, this is a trailer layer, a footer layer, that bit there. We didn't have to do anything with it. Again, if I go into my layer manager, we've now got a header layer and a footer layer. If I go into my header layer, I can see up here, there's my header layer. And it doesn't have any traps. It's just there. And the only reason I know it's a header layer is because I said it's a header layer. So the selected lines will be ignored after each page break. And on my footer layer, the selected lines will be ignored prior to each page break. So we've got footer, followed by header, followed by the data, followed by footer, followed by header. Okay. So what we've done effectively is we put in our layers, then we selected the header layer, picked the 3 heading lines. There was no trap required. We simply clicked on the header layer. And then we did the same thing at the bottom, no trap required, clicked on the footer layer, saved the layer, preview the database. And now, when we're happy, we've previewed it, it is giving us what we want. So now I can say File, Import the report into IDEA. It asks me, do I want to proceed? I have to save the template describing all of this information. I've already got it, but I'll say do it again and replace it. And now, if I look with an idea. It should be coming in. Ask me, do I want to generate field statistics? Not particularly. So it's importing it, and there's all of those transactions. Now that's coming from a fairly standard report, the kind of thing that you get a printout of every day. It could be coming in a text file, it could be coming in a PDF file. There's no big deal. It's got regular information in columns. We've got different types of information in header lines, in detail lines, in summary lines, etc. But that's not what you always get, unfortunately, or perhaps fortunately. So we need to look at line entries with multi-line field options. With any multi-line entry in the field editor, one of the lines has to be an line. And by default, the first line you define is the anchor line. If no unique character or pattern exists, then you have to choose a different one. Okay. So all you then do is click in another line as the anchor line, and then the red arrow indicates which is the selected line. Okay. And again, we can do that with Dave's. We can go into Dave's store. We can go in and say we will import to idea our print report, which is Dave's Bookstore 5, but we're going to pick up the template, Dave's Bookstore 5, and we're going to give the capability. You can see that over here we anchor layer here. If we go into layer 1, layer manager, there's our base layer, and we picked up our base layer. Edit up here, that little indicator, that red arrow, is showing you that is your base layer. But I can change it to something else. I could go down here and change it from there to there. In this case, I'm happy with the one I've got. I don't need to change it. And exclude it. Okay. You'll see later on when we get into this. So our transactions or detail lines are defined in the base layers. The other information, such as the company name, address, etc., was in the append layer. And the information that was captured above it, which was the name and address, is known as the pre-append layer. And that was account number, contact, address, etc. And the details regarding those transactions appearing after the transactions are classified as the post-append layer, and that was the telephone number. Now, if the blank cells are left blank, only the first base layer record gets the append information, and only the last base record gets the post-append information. So if we left it the way it was, only that record would have got that information. These would have been blank. And as far as the telephone number is concerned, only the last transaction would have had that. These would have been blank. So obviously that can get rather confusing. So typically we go for it by using those pre and post append layers and say use information from the previous file. It says there, I'm not going to do it. Let's repeat Dave's definition using blanks and look at the resulting database. We did that as we were actually going through it. But if you want to do it yourself, as they say, if you want to do this at home, then by all means feel free to go ahead and do that. Okay, which brings us to polling question number 2. And if I fire off polling question number 2, we're going to have a look at our question number 2. And question number 2 is saying, with multi-line entry in the field editor, one of the lines must be what? An anchor line, a base line, a header line, or a footer line. Give everyone a chance. And that looks as though everyone has now answered it, so we'll close the poll. And I'll show the poll results. And of course, absolutely correct. With the multi-line, one of the lines has to be the anchor line. Okay. So let us continue. And we're going to have a look at floating traps. Floating traps used within floating layers. And a floating layer is used when the data is not conveniently laid out in columns. So it could be coming from a system file, it could be a log file, and any trapped layer then is a floating trap. And instead of looking at the columns, it looks at each individual line horizontally rather than vertically. Now, there's some things that you have to know about floating traps. You have a multi-line field, the way we had with the address. You cannot define it in a floating layer. A space between trap characters gives you 2 separate trap characters. So that :// would be a single trap, : space / would be 2 traps. The starting position of any field is defined to the right of a floating trap, offset from the trap character. And the starting position of a field defining to the left of the floating trap is also offset from that trap character. Now that tells you where the trap field starts. Where it finishes is determined by the field's actual width as defined within the field details. So how does all that lot work? Well, before we do, let's just check if anyone is still awake. Okay. Question was, can I repeat that? The video lag didn't allow you to follow. Okay, let me go back. I'm presuming you mean, hang on, we've got another question. Okay. Let me jump out and go back. It's the easiest way to talk in terms of floating traps. Okay. What we're doing with the floating trap is we're using it in a different type of file, and we'll come and to do this. Okay. But what you've got is you've got a file coming in with differing types of line. Let's go and bring one in and take a look. I'll close Dave's Bookshop down, and we'll go and we'll open a file. We'll import a file. I'm still going to bring in a print report, but the file I'm going to bring in now for my tutorial is weblog. Okay. And you can see here I've got a different kind of file. Okay. On this one, I've got differing records. In fact, Let me kill off that one because that one's actually got very similar lines. We'll bring in one that's really different. Instead of weblog, I'm going to bring in access. Now that is what you get if you typically bring in a log file. It could be an access log, it could be a log file of errors on a file or errors on a system or communication logs or any kind of log. But what you've got is you've got similar information, but that one there says get that and stops there. This one is much longer. Some of these go on for quite a while, some of them are very short. If we look at that, that one goes from there to there. On the one below it, it goes from there way out to here. So they're not in nice, convenient vertical columns. So what I need to be able to do is, instead of defining vertical columns of information, I need to be able to define it that says this field starts here and finishes when it finishes. Doesn't finish in position 20, it finishes when it finishes. And the way we do that is to define it as a floating layer with floating traps. So, if you brought in the file, if you haven't, let's go back and do it again. I'm going to bring it in as a print report file, and the file I'm going to bring in is called access.txt. And that, again, I want to define a layer within my access.txt. But this time I'm not creating a standard layer, I'm going to create a floating layer. Okay, happy. Now, in order to define this as a floating layer, I need to define this first field. Now you can see there that it's a certain number of characters long, but over here it's a smaller number of characters long. So what I'm going to do is up here, I'm going to put in a space trap. And that's going to give me everything, all of these fields have been selected. Okay? Happy so far. But what I'm going to do is I'm now going to define that field. And you can see when I've highlighted that field has not come in as a 20-digit field or whatever. What it's done is it says that field is that length, the same field in this record is that length, the same field in this record is that length. Because this is a floating field. And you can see it's taken from the space character backwards. It will figure out how long that field is in that record and how long the field is in that record. From there, backwards. Okay? So I'm going to call that, that's my host name. It's a character field and it's showing 14 characters. In actual fact, that one's less than 14 characters, but it's no big deal. So I'm happy with that. I can now move on to my next one. Okay. So what I'm getting when I start looking at this is every entry is going to have a client host name followed by a space. There's my client host name followed by a space. But the length of it is going to vary. And the space is not one single column. You can see down here we've got hyphens. So it's actually following that and that and that. It's one space after the last character. Now, if I remove that, if I delete that, all of this is gone. On the button bar, you'll see one of the buttons is called floating trap for non-tabular format file. If I take that off and put in a space, you'll see it's only picked up the first few records because they are the only ones with a space in that character. There may be some further down, there are a few further down which have a space there, but it's not the same because that one's now got an extra hyphen. So by defining it without it being a floating trap, you're only going to get individual records. To allow it to float across the record, it has to be defined as a floating trap. And you can see there, it's not picking up enough. Okay, now I can't move it because that will change that. If I try and move that, that's not going to work. But what I can do is I can go over to my actual width, and I can actual width 20. I can make it anything I want because it's going to move until it hits a space. 20 characters, so it's 100 characters long. If I make that 100, it will not affect it because the actual width is from that back because it's going to the left of it. Okay, so if I put that in as 100, it will make no difference. Happy? Okay, let's see what else we have here. Well, we have our date. And again, because we have a floating trap there, it will automatically adjust it around that. Okay? What this is saying is it's so many characters after the floating trap. So it's so many characters there, it's so many characters there, it's so many characters there. So we're happy with that, and I'll call that date. This bit is very straightforward, there's nothing complicated. My next one is going to be my time, and again it takes that offset that you can see down there, 32, as being the offset from the space character, and that's going to be my time. And here we have the microseconds. Now it starts to get tricky because there's my next one starting. Okay, I need to tell it I'm going to start my next field just there with quotations. And my next field is going to go all the way along to there. And that's going to be my get instruction. So that's my request type. Oops. My request type. But you can see again, that one's stopping there, but that one isn't. It's stopping in the same place. What I need to do is tell it, there is the end of that field. So it's from there to there is the field. And then I can go down to my, I make that 100. You can see that these have now shot out. They haven't shot out 100 characters. They've shot out to a maximum of 100 characters, but they've shot out the length of from there to there. Okay, so I'm getting a variable length field. If I stopped there, just to have a look at what I've got in the database so far, you can see there's my host's name, and it's given me vertical columns, but it's only given me the contents that I need. Again, the date is the same, the time is the same, the microseconds. The request type, again, varies in length in every field. So it's given me, on my database, the maximum length. It's not giving me 100 characters. Somewhere in there, there's going to be a field that's going to go the full length of what you can see on the, but it's not a full 100 characters. That is not 100 characters long. Okay. Are we happy? Hopefully. I have a query. Okay. I see I've answered it already, so that's fine. Okay, so we need to go now and define the rest of it. So the way we do that is we go back in on our layer manager, pick up the layer and edit it. And now I can add some more. So the next one I want to add are these numbers. You can see I've got some strange things for 9. This one has got those quotations included. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a closer there. We'll chop it back. Okay. But again, that one has got more characters, so I need to increase the width of this and put it out to 10. Okay. When I do that, that will now pick in those extra ones. I could put it out to 20, it would make no difference. But watch what happens now. If I say that's okay, and I say I want to preview the database, you'll see this lot is all saying errors. And that's a problem. Why are they errors? Well, they're errors because if I go and edit that and I look at that field, I can call it numbers. Oops, numbers. But calling it numbers doesn't make it numbers. And if you look at that, we've got spaces in the middle there. So that's not a number field. That is, in fact, a character field. Okay? And you can see now it's too big. So I will delete that, remove that field anchor, leave it that length, and then change the definition here out to 40 or whatever. But can you see what's happened? Because I've edited that, this has changed. So I need to go back. I think it's a bug in IDEA because I don't feel it should do that. And I've reported it. I need to go back and make that 100 again. When I've edited that, it's reverted that back to its default. And the default is the actual width is the display width of the first record. If I tick it now and then go and look at my database, you can see I now have all those numbers being shown correctly. So if you get that situation where you have an error coming up and you think, I don't understand where the error is coming from, just have a look at what you're actually doing and say, hang on a second, that's numeric, but it's not actually numeric, there's a space in there. Make sure that you've defined it correctly. Again, if I go back into my layer manager, and I'm going to, so now I need to add in the other items. So I'm going to pick up, first one is going to be the URL, which is character. It's already defined it as character. But again, I want it to end on that one. The way it was going to go all the way out. This one didn't have it in it. So it was carrying right on till there. So I wanted that, but I want it again to increase so that I pick them all up. Okay. If I take that out, then it's going to say everything's 100 width. If I go back on this and just define it out to there, you can see it's picked those up correctly. But there's one or two of them where it's actually not going to pick it up correctly, like there. And if I change that to 100, it's going to zap everything out to 100 unless I tell it, stop when you field anchor. Now I can make that 100, and it will go out. And you'll see in this third line down, there is nothing in there. There is no URL in there. So it's only picked up that one hyphen, which is correct. The last field on this is coming from here all the way along to there. And this one is going to be my browser for the client. Again, I'm going to change that out to 100. But again, see what's happened. Because I went in and edited, these have changed. If I go back to look at that one, it's gone back to 29. So I need to put that back out to 100 again. As I say, I'm not sure if it's a simple mistake or a bug within IDEA, or if it's actually supposed to be like that. That width 8 needs to go out to 20, and that width needs to go out to 100, whatever. When I'm happy, I'll tick it, and I can then go in, File, and preview my database. And now there's my host name, date, time, microseconds, the request type, the number, which we know is not numeric, the URL. Now you may think that's a whole pile of wasted space, but you can see as we go down, some of those URLs are going to go all the way out. And then we come into the client browser, which also looks as though it's got spare space at the end, but in actual fact, some of them have got a lot more. When I'm happy, then I simply say, I can either say save the template, and again I've already got it, or I can say import it into IDEA, and there's all of my data now brought in. Now remember where that came from. That came from a file that just looked like a load of numbers and characters and all the rest scattered up and down the file contents. So it's actually managed to sort it out, but it's not sorted it out based on vertical columns. It's sorted it out horizontally and then put it into vertical columns. So I can now analyze it, I can print it, I can report on it, and hopefully make some kind of statement as an auditor. Okay. I apologize for the lag in answering your questions. What happens is when I go into IDEA, your questions disappear from my screen. And I've actually got to go back and bring them in on top of IDEA. Otherwise I can't see them. Okay. As I say, if you want to try that, try it, and my advice, try it different ways. Again, I'll go and import it. I'll bring it in. Now I could bring in a template and edit it, or I could simply go in and start playing with it again, create that as a floating layer, and then you forget to put an anchor in, or you put the anchor in the wrong place. If you put the anchor in somewhere where the anchor doesn't belong, it will tell you, it will highlight in red. If you put an anchor somewhere where it could belong, it will accept it, but it will give you funny answers. So you just need to keep checking back and go back before you commit as an auditor to this is what it all means. You need to go back and say, hang on a second, is this database what I think I'm wanting to look at? Okay. There's an old saying in auditing, never believe what the first printout tells you, particularly if you wrote the program yourself. Okay. So we have a couple of polling questions for you. Polling question 3. Is looking at multi-line within polling question 3. We are asking the question, multi-line fields cannot be defined in the anchor line, cannot be defined in a standard layer, cannot be defined in a floating layer, can only be defined in a floating layer. Please vote now. We're almost complete. Okay, I will close it there. Actually, we've only got 50% voting, but never mind. And I will share the results. And the results are, of course, that a multi-line field cannot be defined in a floating layer. Remember, you cannot define multiple lines when you're going across. Multi-line is going vertical and you're going horizontal. Okay. We created our floating trap using the information that we received, a client host name or date or request type. We created our floating layer. That was the data that we used. And we created our floating trap. Now in creating our floating traps, every entry has got a client host name followed by a space. And as I said, you can use a generic space trap to say it's the end of the host name, but the length of the client name varies. So the space trap has to be a floating trap. If it's not, it will not give you what you expected to see. Okay. Which brings us to polling question number 4. Polling question number 4. A floating trap not only anchors lines in the report, but also controls the attributes of a field, ensures that the longest field will be catered for, always ensures a field will end when a space is encountered, or determines whether where a field can begin and end. Please vote now. Once again, my living shall vain. We have 100% have it as D. Okay. Okay. Let us carry on. As I said, as I showed if you create a floating trap without defining it as floating, then only the first few lines will be selected until you get the first record that is not consistent with the description. So then you just cancel the layer, go back, make sure that you've got a floating trap button selected, and then put the space trap, and everything will then be highlighted. Okay. We then went on and defined all of the data. So we had a client host name or date or time, microseconds, request type, the name, etc. The way we did it, no big deal with our microseconds. We needed a quotation mark over the first quotation mark code editor, and then we had our get. Still selected, we put the quotation mark over the second one, and then I said change it to 35. You can change it to anything you want. I think there's a limit within this version of ID, I'll rephrase that. There's a limit within this file of about 450 because the whole record length is only 450 characters long. So you cannot have an actual width longer than the record length. It will tell you you've made a mistake. Okay, we did our number. As note, it's a character field. There's a space in there. It looks like 200, it looks like 818, but there's a space in the middle. So in the second and third line, quotation mark has to be selected as part of the field, and adding the third quotation mark, and then increase the field length. URL, the same thing. Enter another quotation mark, change the actual width. We did the same thing with our client browser, and then go back and check all of the widths. As I say, I don't know if this is a fault in IDEA or deliberately. It's not the way I would normally use it. Just double check and make sure that when you've changed one towards the end, it hasn't reset all of them towards the start. Then save the layer, check your database, and when you're happy, import it into IDEA. Okay. And we've looked at polling question number 4. So now let's move on and have a look at exclude lines. Exclude lines happen where you have a trap. Let's say you've got a decimal point that shows the amount, and you know that that is unique, except for the fact it's also in the total line. And we don't want the total line. So we need some way of excluding the total line. Now you cannot use an exclude line until you've defined your base layer. Okay? You cannot use an exclude line to exclude the line that was the sample that you used for the base layer. You cannot use exclude line to exclude a line which has an append layer attached. And you cannot use an exclude line to lines where you've got defined fields or fields that are part of the base layer. But you need to check in the field details if you're in any doubt to determine which layer the field belongs to. And if you're already filtering out the line, then you can't exclude it. It says there's no point in doing it twice. So let's go back and have a look at another print file. And the print file I'm going to pick up this time, and again, I'll just cancel that and go back and do it from square one. File, import assistant, import to IDEA, print report, and the file I'm going to pick up is the ABC balance sheet. Now, the reason I'm picking the ABC balance sheet is it's a typical kind of file that you're going to get, print out. There's a trial balance. Here's all of my data, and there's my total. Okay. Now, I may want to define all of my data. Remember, you go to the data first, then you might go back and pick up the accounting period or whatever. Fine, but I'm going to pick the first one up. I'm going to create a standard layer because it's all in verticals. Could have been a floating layer, but in this case it's going to be a standing layer. I'm going to pick up something unique. There's a decimal point. So we'll have decimal point, numeric, numeric. Only one problem. It's picked up all of the data I want, but it's also picked up the ledger total. So I'll define the fields that I want. I'll pick up my account name. I can pick up my opening balance. And you can see it's numeric in 2 decimal places. I don't need that one. I do need this. So somehow in here, I'm going to have to pick up all that. And that's going to be my period debits. Now, there was nothing in here, but I could still select that whole column. But just watch what's happened. Because the first one has nothing in it, it's defined it as character, which is wrong. So I'm going to have to go back and get this. It says here, are polling questions used for attendance purposes or CPE credits, or do I need to also answer correctly for CPE credits? I can leave that one to Jim. You do have to record them for CPE credits.
You do not have to answer correctly. You just have to make sure that you respond to the question.
Yeah. The trick is it tells them that you attended.
Exactly.
Rather than you simply registered.
Exactly.
Okay. But as I say, you see that that one now says character, and we know it's not, it's numeric, but these are going to be zeros. So I need to change that from character to numeric, and I need to tell it it's got 2 decimal places. Okay. Now I can move over to here. If you click and let go, you'll immediately find that you've got a field which has got 1 character. Now you can stretch it, and pull it apart and move it, but then typically you click again by mistake and you get that. So what I tend to do is I just remove them. Right click and remove the field anchor. Sorry. Click in it and remove the field anchor. Right click and remove. I'll take the next one, and the next one we know are the period credits. Which is numeric in 2 decimal places. The next one is the period balance. No big deal. And numeric 2 decimal places. And the last one is my closing balance. And I could define the credits and debits and all the rest of it, but at the end of the day, you'll see what we've got ledger total. So if I accept that now, and then I go and say preview my database, you can see I've got total. So if I total that field, it's going to add that one in as well, which I don't want. I want to get rid of that field, that whole line. So all I have to do is go over into my left-hand side and click on it. And you'll see the big red X comes up, and that has now been excluded. So now if I look at my database, the total's gone. Okay. I've still got everything else, but the total's gone. What I have got, which is just an annoyance, but nevertheless I hate these annoyances, is that one's showing as an opening balance, that one's showing as that one's showing as period credits, but it's also got all of the columns. So I'll just change that while I'm at it. Ticket, preview the database, and you can see that this time nothing changed. That remained excluded. Okay. So now if I say File and say import that report to IDEA, proceed with it, save the template. Yes, I'll save the template, replace it, call it ABC balance sheet, and there it is, and I don't have the total. Which means if I look at my field statistics, it's giving me all my values for opening balance, debits, etc., and it's not including the totals. So I could then go and check those figures against those totals. I know what the period debits are, period credits are. I can now go and have a look at them against totals which were in the report to see if the report has added them up correctly. Okay. Everyone happy? So I've excluded it simply by going, selecting it and clicking the left-hand margin to exclude the line. Now, critical, that only excludes that one line. It does not exclude every occurrence of that one line. Okay, so it's only the one. If we want to exclude all of them, then rather than excluding a line, we're going to filter out those lines. So we might have, for example, a total per account. And I don't want the total per account. I'll do the totaling within IDEA. So I need to remove the total line out of every single account. I could sit and go through it one by one and exclude, exclude, exclude. But that really doesn't make a lot of sense. So we've done that, we've defined all of those, we've saved the layer, we've checked the database, we've imported it. Which brings us to polling question number 5. Don't worry if you've been diverted and got pulled off to answer a phone or whatever and you didn't get one of the polling questions answered. If you've answered 5 out of 6 or 4 out of 6, you were there. Okay, so we'll launch that one. And polling question number 5 says a floating trap may be used to terminate a field in a report even though the actual width defined in the field window, in the field details window, is longer, shorter, missing, or none of the above. The floating trap will terminate a field within a report even if the actual field defined is longer, even if it's shorter, even if it's missing, or none of the above. We're sitting with 50%, 60%, 100%. Okay. And the answer is longer. Okay. Remember what happens. If you define it as 100 characters long and the floating trap says this particular entry is 36 characters long, 36 characters is what you're going to get. Okay, so even if it's longer, it chops it. If it's shorter, it doesn't truncate it. Okay. So, if that's what you would do in order to exclude a line, how then would you handle multiple lines? Well, the way you do it is you're using a filter to work at the field level. Now with a filter, you can either say, I want this line included or I want this line excluded. I don't want it in my database or I do want it in my database. specific to specific criteria. And it's case sensitive, and you can do it to any data type. So you can do it to alpha, you can do it to numeric, you can say, I only want items which are not department code 99. You can have a range. Again, you can only add them to the fields defined in the base layer. You cannot add them, you cannot filter based on the append layer fields. So you can't say filter out on that first case, filter out all of those who did not have a contact name, because that was on an append layer. Okay. So going back in, and we'll pick up ABC balance sheet again. I'll go into my import assistant, import to idea, bring up that same balance sheet. But rather than go through defining it all again, I'll pick it up from the ABC balance sheet template and say I want to edit the template. And that's me got it as it was. And if I go down, I can see I've still got my exclude this line. So I don't want to exclude it now. I want to take it out by filtering it out. So I will remove the bit that says exclude a line. You cannot filter something that's excluded. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take that first field. Remember, that first field is the one that's got ledger total. So now I'm going to say I want to edit the layer. And I'm going to take that first field, which is that one there, which is account name, okay, and further down in my field details, I've got my leave blank multi-line filters. Now at the moment it says all. If I click here, I can include or exclude. I can add a filter for that particular field. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, when I click on it, I can say included or excluded. I'm going to say exclude any record with the following date. And the data I want to exclude is anything I can't see it. So let me cancel and come down. Ah, there it is, ledger. Remember, this is case sensitive, so you've got to get it exactly the way you want it. Okay, so I will filter it, excluding total, and that, because I can have multiple filters. Okay, if I say okay now, it's gone. It's not gone because I've deleted that line. It's gone because every time in the printout that it sees the title ledger total, it will take it out. It will not include it. Okay. Again, I can now save that again. I can go and have a look at previewing my database, and again it's gone. But this time, multiple transactions, the totals will disappear in every single line. Okay. Also very important, if you are coming to audit or to repeat work that's been done by another auditor, so you're either coming to check their work, or you're coming to take what they did last year and redo it this year with a different file, etc. Very important to check for any kind of filters to ensure that you are looking at what you think you are looking at, to make sure that those field lengths are correct and that you're looking at all of the field and not only part of the field, that the headings are correct and the page breaks have been correctly defined, so that you're not missing data simply because somebody didn't define a page break. Okay, so all of these things, typically, if you are the audit supervisor and an auditor has done this work for you, you're going to go and check this. Okay, if you are the one that's doing it, you're going to check it for yourself anyway. And if it's picking up something that somebody did last year, you're definitely going to be checking it. Okay. So again, I could import that. In this case, I'm not really worried worried. So no. Okay. So we've used our filters and we've excluded, which is us to polling question number 6. Polling question number 6 says an exclude line. An exclude line can only be used when? Before the base layer has been defined, in a line that was selected as a sample line, to exclude a line already being excluded in the filter, or none of the above. And the correct answer would be, give me 1 second. My apologies, I just locked my wife out of the house. Not a good idea. And the consist is in a line selected as a sample line, which unfortunately is almost, but not quite. The answer is none of the above. Okay, it can be used in any of them. Or rather, it cannot be used in a baseline. It cannot be used in a line that was selected as a sample line. It cannot be used to exclude a line that was already excluded in the filter. So the answer, I'm afraid, is none of the above. Okay. Which brings us, as they say, rather neatly, to the end of the webinar. Further information, as usual, is available from those sources. And do you have any questions? If so, don't be shy. That's what we're here to answer. If you are shy about answering, or it occurs to you late, or you try this again and think, now, what was it you did there? You've got our information at the end of this. You can always come back to us. The next webinar in IDEA is on using statistics in IDEA, and the agenda is looking at statistical sampling versus non-stat sampling, variable versus attribute sampling, monetary unit sampling, learning to use field statistics within IDEA, and using random selection of records for examination. Jim, hand it back to you.
Great, Richard. Thank you very much. If you would just show the screen with our contact information, I believe that that should be coming up there.
Yep.
There we go.
You'll also find that my number on there is a 303 number. Now that's actually a Skype number. So that will get me in South Africa as well as in America.
Excellent. Very good. Well, I think that you've done a great job in presenting this information today. The next webinar on stat sampling should be very interesting as well, so we look forward to you joining us, and thank you for joining us today. Thank you, Richard, for putting on a great presentation. In addition to sending us questions, you will also have access to the recording. We'll be sending out that information as well, so you can always replay it and look at the information that way. The purpose of our Training Without Travel webinars is to provide you with high-quality, low-cost online alternative training solutions covering timely topics with value-added resources and tools that you can use in your job. We bring the world's best subject matter experts directly to your desktop with timely information. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today, and thank you, Richard. And I'd like to wish everybody a great day, or a great morning, or a great evening, wherever you are. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Good
Richard.
night.
Okay, take care.
Good afternoon.
Right.
Cheers.
Bye-bye.